The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the quiet, suburban backyard. Max, a playful golden retriever, was at it again, digging furiously in his favorite spot. His owner, Jake, watched from the porch, shaking his head. "What are you up to this time, buddy?" he muttered, sipping his coffee. But tonight felt different. Max wasn't just playing. His paws moved with urgency, dirt flying everywhere. Then he froze. His ears perked up, his body stiffened. A deep growl rumbled from his throat. Jake frowned. "Max." The dog hesitated, then let out a sharp bark, a bark that sent chills down Jake's spine. He stepped forward, peering into the hole. His breath hitched. Something metallic glinted beneath the dirt. Heart pounding, he crouched down, brushing the soil away. It was a rusted old metal box. His fingers trembled as he pried it open. Inside lay a faded photograph, a bundle of letters, and something far more sinister. Jake's pulse thundered in his ears as realization set in. Max hadn't just found an old box. He had uncovered a secret, one that someone had tried to bury forever. What Max found would change everything. Jake had always considered himself lucky. He lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood, the kind where everyone knew each other and secrets were hard to keep. His backyard, surrounded by a white picket fence and towering oak trees, had been Max's playground ever since he adopted him as a puppy. The golden retriever was more than just a pet. He was family. Max had a habit of digging. Whether it was for old toys' bones or just for fun, he could spend hours burrowing into the earth. Jake never thought much of it. But in recent weeks, something about Max's behavior had changed. He wasn't just digging randomly anymore. He kept returning to the same spot, near the base of an old oak tree. Every time Jake called him away, the dog would hesitate, ears twitching as if listening for something beneath the ground. One evening, as Jake sat on his porch watching the sunset, he noticed Max was at it again. But this time there was an intensity in his movements. He wasn't just playing, he was searching. Dirt flew in all directions as Max's paws tore through the soil. Jake had seen him dig before, but never like this. It was as if something deep within him knew there was something there, something that had been hidden for a long time. Jake's curiosity got the better of him. He walked over, expecting to find another old chew toy, or perhaps a buried tennis ball. But the look in Max's eyes stopped him cold. The dog wasn't wagging his tail like usual. His fur bristled, his eyes locked onto the ground. Then he let out a low, rumbling growl. Jake's stomach tightened. He knelt down and brushed some dirt away with his hands. That's when he saw it, a metallic edge peeking through the soil. His fingers scraped against something cold and rusted. A box. It was old, covered in dirt and corrosion, but intact. With a deep breath, Jake pulled it from the ground. His hands shook as he pried it open. Inside he found a faded photograph, a bundle of letters, and something else. A chill ran down his spine. This wasn't just some forgotten trinket. Whatever Max had found, it was never meant to be uncovered. Jake's hands trembled as he lifted the rusted box from the ground. Max stood beside him, his body tense, ears perked forward, as if he, too, sensed the weight of the moment. The golden retriever had never acted like this before. Not with old bones, not with buried toys. This was different. The box was heavier than Jake expected. The metal was corroded, yet sturdy, as though it had been deliberately preserved. He hesitated, wiping the dirt off with his sleeve before slowly prying it open. The hinges groaned in protest, revealing its long-hidden contents. Inside, a bundle of aged, yellowed letters lay tied together with a brittle ribbon. Next to them, an old black and white photograph curled at the edges. Jake picked it up carefully, his pulse quickening. The image was faded, but he could make out the figures, a man and a woman standing in front of a familiar house. His house. A strange unease settled in his chest. Who were they? Why was this buried in his backyard? Max let out a soft whimper and nudged the box with his nose. That's when Jake saw it. The real reason his dog had been so insistent. Beneath the letters and photo, something metallic glinted under the dim backyard light. He reached in and pulled out a small, rusted key. His mind raced. A key to what? The house had been in his family for generations. There were no hidden safes, no locked rooms, at least none that he knew of. Jake stood up, staring at the box, the key, the old letters. A part of him wanted to ignore it, to put it all back in the ground, and forget he had ever found it. But another part, the part driven by sheer curiosity, refused to let go. Max barked suddenly, the sound sharp and urgent. Jake turned, startled, but saw nothing unusual. Just the dark outline of the house looming behind him, the windows reflecting the dim glow of the porch light. Yet, in that moment, the place he had always called home suddenly felt unfamiliar. Something was waiting to be uncovered. And whatever it was, Max had found it for a reason. Jake's heart pounded as he turned the rusted key over in his hands. The weight of it felt significant, as if it held the power to unlock something long forgotten. Max stood by his side, tail still, eyes locked on the mysterious box. The dog knew something Jake didn't, or maybe something Jake wasn't ready to accept. Determined, he picked up the bundle of letters and unfolded the first one. The ink was faded, but the words were still legible. His breath hitched as he read the first few lines. "Dearest Eleanor, I fear this will be my last letter to you. They are closing in on me. If anything happens, you'll know where to look. The truth cannot stay buried forever." Jake's fingers tightened around the fragile paper. His mind spun with questions. Who was Eleanor? Who had written this? And what truth was buried here? A cold breeze rustled through the backyard, making the moment feel eerily surreal. Max let out a low growl. Jake followed his gaze, and then he saw it. Not far from where Max had been digging, the dirt looked uneven, as if it had been disturbed before. His stomach twisted. Was there something else hidden beneath? Grabbing a shovel, he started to dig. The soil was loose, making his job easier. After only a few minutes, his shovel hit something solid. His breath caught in his throat. Slowly, he cleared away the dirt until he uncovered a wooden chest. It was old, the wood cracked and splintered with age. The same symbol carved onto the rusted key was etched into its surface. Hands trembling, he fit the key into the lock. With a soft click, the lid loosened. He hesitated for a moment before pushing it open. Inside, wrapped in faded cloth, lay stacks of old documents, a few newspaper clippings, and Jake's stomach lurched a gun. His eyes darted to the newspapers. The headlines sent a chill through his spine. Local banker mysteriously disappears, suspect still at large. Secret scandal rocks, small town, authorities remain silent. Unsolved murder from 1953 reopens after new evidence emerges. Jake felt like the world was spinning. His backyard was hiding a decades-old crime. Jake's mind reeled. This wasn't just a random discovery. It was a confession, a trail of breadcrumbs leading to a truth someone had tried desperately to keep hidden. A shiver ran down his spine as he realized the implications. Someone in his family, or someone connected to this land, had been hiding a dark secret for decades. And now, thanks to Max, it was finally coming to light. Jake sat at his kitchen table, the old documents and newspaper clippings spread before him. The dim kitchen light flickered slightly, casting eerie shadows over the evidence. His hands trembled as he flipped through the fragile pages. This wasn't just a forgotten mystery. This was a decades-old crime that had been buried in his own backyard. Max lay at his feet, ears perked as if he sensed the tension in the air. Jake reached for his laptop and started searching the names from the articles. The first one he typed in, Samuel Whitmore. The search results sent a chill through his spine. Samuel Whitmore had been a respected banker in the 1950s, known for his connections with powerful people. But then in 1953, he vanished without a trace. His case was one of the town's biggest mysteries. Some believed he had fled, while others whispered about foul play. His disappearance had never been solved. Jake picked up the letter he had found earlier, the one addressed to Eleanor. Could she have been his wife? Or perhaps something more? The next name in the articles, Robert Langley. Jake's breath hitched as he read the details. Langley had been a police officer at the time of Whitmore's disappearance. He had been assigned to the case, but had suddenly retired just a year later. No explanation. No statements. Just gone. Jake's gut twisted. Could this officer have been involved? Had he buried the truth literally? His fingers hovered over the keyboard as he hesitated before typing in the final name. The one that had appeared in multiple letters and scribbled notes. Eleanor Harper. The search results took a moment to load, but when they did, Jake's jaw dropped. Eleanor Harper had lived in this very house. She was listed as Whitmore's former secretary, and rumors suggested she had been his lover. But she had died young, just a year after his disappearance. Cause of death? Officially, a tragic accident. But an old forum post Jake found suggested otherwise. Some believed she had known the truth about Whitmore's disappearance, and someone had wanted her silenced. Jake leaned back in his chair, his heart pounding. The story was piecing itself together. Whitmore had likely been murdered, and Eleanor had known too much. Someone had hidden the evidence in the backyard, possibly Officer Langley, and buried it, hoping it would never be found. But now, thanks to Max, it was uncovered. A knock at the door made Jake jump. His pulse quickened as he walked to the front door and peered through the peephole. A man in his late 60s stood outside, his face partially shadowed by the porch light. Jake didn't recognize him, but something about him sent a chill down his spine. Taking a deep breath, he opened the door. "Can I help you?" The man's eyes flickered toward the house, then back at Jake. His voice was calm, but there was an edge beneath it. "You've been digging up things best left buried." The year was 1953, and the streets of the small town were quieter than usual. A cold autumn breeze rattled the trees as Samuel Whitmore stepped out of his dimly lit office. He adjusted his coat, glancing over his shoulder as if sensing something, or someone lurking in the darkness. Samuel had spent years keeping secrets, making deals with powerful men who controlled more than just businesses. They controlled lives. And now, he had something they wanted. Proof that could ruin them. The documents in his briefcase could expose corruption that ran all the way to the top. As he reached his car, he hesitated. The feeling of being watched tightened around him like a noose. His breath was visible in the cold night air. Then, before he could react, a shadow moved. A sharp pain struck the back of his head, and everything went dark. When he awoke, he was tied to a chair in a dimly lit basement. A single bulb flickered overhead. Across from him stood Robert Langley, the very officer assigned to investigate corruption in town. But Langley wasn't there to help. He leaned against the wall, smoking a cigarette, his badge glinting in the low light. "You shouldn't have been digging, Whitmore," Langley muttered, exhaling smoke. Samuel's pulse pounded in his ears. "If you kill me, the truth will come out." Langley smirked. "That's the thing about truth. It only matters if there's someone left to tell it." A second man stepped forward from the shadows. Someone Samuel recognized immediately. It was Mr. Alden, a high-ranking businessman with ties to the city's elite. Alden's voice was calm, almost disappointed. "You were a smart man, Sam. You should have left well enough alone." Samuel fought against the ropes, but it was useless. He knew what was coming. He just didn't know where they'd hide the body. Hours later, the ground was soft beneath a lone oak tree in Eleanor Harper's backyard. Officer Langley wiped the dirt from his hands and threw one final shovel of soil over the makeshift grave. Alden stood nearby, adjusting his suit, making sure not a speck of dirt touched him. Langley nodded toward the house. "What about Eleanor?" Alden sighed. "If she stays quiet, she lives. If not, we bury another secret." Eleanor never spoke a word, but someone else did. 70 years later, A dog named Max unearthed the truth. The courtroom was silent as the jury foreman stood, his hands trembling slightly as he unfolded the slip of paper. The weight of decades-old secrets hung in the air, pressing down on everyone in the room. Across from him sat Robert Langley, now an old man, his once commanding presence reduced to a frail figure in an ill-fitting suit. His hands were clasped together, knuckles white, as if he could still control the outcome. Eleanor Harper's family sat in the front row, holding their breath. After years of unanswered questions, years of whispered theories and silent grief, the moment had arrived. The foreman cleared his throat. "We, the jury, find the defendant guilty." A collective gasp filled the courtroom. Langley's face went pale, his mouth opening slightly as if to protest. But no words came. For decades, he had lived above the law, until a dog unearthed the truth. The judge's gavel struck the bench. "Robert Langley, you are hereby sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole." Langley's lawyer whispered something, but the disgraced officer wasn't listening. He was staring straight ahead, his expression unreadable. Perhaps he was remembering the night he buried Samuel Whitmore. Or perhaps he was realizing that, in the end, justice had found him anyway. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed Eleanor's granddaughter, Lucy Harper, who had fought tirelessly to bring the case to light. She held up a faded photograph of her grandmother standing under the old oak tree where Samuel had been buried. "My grandmother always knew something was wrong," Lucy said, voice thick with emotion. But she was too afraid to speak. Now, after all these years, Samuel Whitmore's story has finally been told. And standing beside her, wagging his tail, was Max, the dog who started it all. His discovery had solved a 70-year-old mystery, bringing closure to a family that had spent generations searching for answers. As Langley was escorted away in handcuffs, Eleanor's family returned to the backyard where it all began. The oak tree still stood tall, its roots entwined with the past. But now it no longer held secrets, only the truth that time refused to bury. Because sometimes justice isn't swift. Sometimes it takes a dog to dig it up. Some stories stick with us, not just because they're shocking, but because they reveal something deeper about human nature, about justice, and about the secrets that time tries to bury. Think about it. How many mysteries remain hidden simply because no one is looking? How many voices like Samuel Whitmore's have been silenced, their stories untold, waiting for someone or something to uncover the truth? Max, a dog who was once dismissed as just another household pet, became the hero of a decades-old tragedy. A single bark, a simple act of digging, unraveled a mystery that law enforcement had ignored for years. If not for him, Robert Langley might have gone to his grave without facing justice. And that raises an even bigger question. What else are we overlooking? How many cases go cold because no one asks the right questions? How many families are still searching for the truth? How many people, even today, are waiting for someone to fight for them? This isn't just a story about an old crime. It's a reminder that justice has no expiration date. That no matter how many years pass, the truth has a way of surfacing. But justice doesn't always find its way on its own. It takes people who refuse to look away. It takes persistence. It takes courage. So here's the challenge. What will you do when you see something that doesn't add up? Will you turn away or will you dig deeper? Because if a dog can change the course of history with nothing but his instincts, imagine what we can do when we refuse to let the truth stay buried. If this story moved you, share it. Let people know that justice, no matter how long delayed, is never truly denied. And if you believe that every voice deserves to be heard, subscribe for more stories that uncover the truth, expose the past, and remind us all that sometimes the answers are right beneath our feet. Because sometimes heroes come in the most unexpected forms.